The quadratic formula is pretty much used to solve for x for a quadratic equation when it's set equal to 0. In other words, if I have a quadratic equation written in this form, which I'm going to quickly explain that, if I were to solve for x for any quadratic written in this form when it's set equal to 0, that's what the quadratic formula allows me to do. It allows me to figure out the x values of this quadratic for any quadratic. So pretty much the a, b, and c values, they don't change. The a, b, and c values are unique for any quadratic, while the x value can change depending on what it is. And we're going to find the x value that makes this equal to 0. And so the x value is going to be in terms of a, b, and c, and we're going to have to find out what that is. Now, there are many different ways to solve a quadratic equation, and you could say, oh, factoring, complete the square, quadratic formula, graphing, but the way that we want to do it is a way that works for any quadratic equation, and that would be, oh, the quadratic formula, but we don't know the quadratic formula, so we can do completing the square. So what happens, can we complete the square for this? Of course we can, right? Completing the square is a method that works for any quadratic. And we kind of showed how that works in another video. And so I'm going to show you how to complete the square of a quadratic like this. And that will give us the quadratic formula because we're solving for x. All right, so let's start. We would first start by subtracting c on both sides. Right, remember, try to get x more alone. That's the whole goal. And I really don't want to show that work. I'm not going to show that work anymore. So I have ax squared plus bx equals negative c. And I'm going to divide a on both sides, right? And so this is usually the form we're in. This is usually the form we're going to be in when we're solving a quadratic, right? Or solving by completing the square. And we know at this point, we want to add some value to both sides. What value are you going to add to both sides? And you probably are thinking b over 2 squared. And we showed where that came from in the completing the square video. So I'm just going to show side work down here. b over a over 2 squared, right? We take this value right here, divide it by 2 and square it, and then add whatever that is to both sides of the equation. And so what's this going to be? Well, the first thing we could do is we could say, oh, well, b over a divided by 2 is just b over 2a. If we square that, we get b squared all over 4a squared, right? And so we're adding this to both sides. I'm going to erase this in a minute, so we'll be good. So we're adding that to both sides of the equation. What happens when we do that? I'm just going to say we did that. And so if this is true, I'm just going to put this right here. And so that's what we have. So we added b over 2 squared to both sides of the equation, right? Now we know to write this in a different form, right? And we also showed where that form came from. And so this is just x plus b over 2a squared, right? We take this value, divide it by 2, right? And that's what goes there. And so you kind of memorize that procedure, which is fine because you can understand where it comes from the picture, but it's pretty much an important process to just be able to do, right? That's another important thing. Now, to combine these things together, you're going to want to get common denominators, okay? So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to say, oh, this is negative 4ac all over 4a squared. Pretty much what I did was I multiplied the numerator by 4a and multiplied the denominator by 4a, right? Because that will give me 4a squared, which is also right there. I'm going to add b squared all over 4a squared to get that. I'm going to rewrite this in a different way. The b squared minus 4ac, right? Some of you might recognize that. And so that's what we get. And so some people might be able to see exactly where this is going. That's pretty good. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the square root of both sides, right? Because I'm trying to solve for x. And then we know that when we are taking the square root of both sides, for some reason there's a plus or minus there. And I might explain why that plus or minus is there in another video. But remember, we're solving for x. And x, when we take the square root of something, right? X can be plus or minus that value, because if we do plus or minus the square root of something squared, we'll get that something back. But remember, that could be positive or negative, because if we square the negative part or that positive part, we get the same thing, right? So if we square -1 or +1, right? Because really, there's a 1 there, we get the same answer. That's one way to think about it. All right, so when we do this, we get x plus b over 2a equals the square root of b squared minus 4ac plus or minus. And remember, we're going to do the square root of 4a squared as well, right? That's 2a. And we subtract b over 2a on both sides. You get x equals negative b over 2a plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And remember, you could just combine these things together. So we get plus or minus there. And then we have 2a on the bottom. And we've solved for x. That's the quadratic formula.